Chapter 30 of The Airship Boys in the Great War by Lysle F. This Librivox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Tom Hirsch. Chapter 30 The Most Terrible Accident of All.
"What in goodness' name is the matter down there? Where did that shell strike us?" shouted Ned anxiously through the speaking tube, while both Alan and Bob tumbled downstairs in answer to Buck's frantic appeal from the engine room. "Put on every ounce of pressure you can," they signaled up to the boy in the pilot room presently. He did so, and for a bit the flyer showed a spurt of her old speed, leaving the Zeppelin a dwindling speck in the distance. Within 20 minutes, however, despite the application of every power appliance in the equipment, the speed again began to diminish until the airship was not making more than 15 miles an hour. As the velocity gradually decreased, the huge wing-like exterior planes automatically unfolded. But, to the horror of the boys, no sooner had they attained full expansion than the whole lateral series on the right side of the hull collapsed into mere wreckage, dragging the flyer violently over in that direction and hurling the young aeronauts off their feet. The bursting shell had indeed done effective damage. It had struck the armored magnesium hull just about midships, plowed its way through the metal, leaving a great jagged hole in the twisted sheets of steel, and had exploded just outside the engine room, one partition of which was demolished with various alarming damage to the machinery. At the same time, some flying pieces of the exploding shell must have struck the exterior plane and propulsion mechanism, snapping the supports and rendering the entire outside wings wholly useless. In his confusion, when the right lateral plane series collapsed, Ned threw on every particle of power at his command, mindful that an increase of the vessel's velocity would cause the disabled planes to fold away again automatically out of the wind and so lessen the imminent danger of overturning. The acceleration was only momentary, though, and the ocean flyer seemed in danger of rolling over sideways at any minute. "Ned, shut off the juice on those main outside propellers, and try to run on the interior auxiliary propeller," yelled Buck up the speaking tube. "That ought to give us a little extra speed while we're trying to cut away the plane wreckage which is dragging us over sideways." Ned was rattled. He had not thought of that before, but he instantly did as he was bid. Despite the damaged mechanism, the flyer responded to this new application of power and speeded up until a 50-mile-an-hour velocity was registered on the instruments. Leaving Buck on his knees beside the half-incapacitated engines, Alan and Bob seized sharp axes and rushed out upon the exterior runways extending 2/3 of the way around the hull. The cry of astonishment burst from both boys simultaneously. "The sea! We're passing out over the ocean!" It was true. Dim in the distance behind them stretched the broken coastline of Germany, while beneath, to north, to east, to west, tossed the angry gray waters of the North Sea. The misty shape of the British Isles lay like a low-hanging cloud to the southwest. Almost directly below the airship, a huge merchant vessel could be seen steaming grandly along. "Say, I wish that we were all down there aboard that big ship instead of where we are," said Alan. "Not for me," replied Bob emphatically. "Don't you remember hearing how both the English and the Germans have declared an absolute embargo on all merchant ports and have mined the entire ocean to interrupt each other's commerce? Dangerous as our position up here now is, I'd lots sooner be here in a crippled airship than down there." Even as he spoke, there came a terrific explosion far down below. Sparks and broken spars were hurled high. The big merchantman appeared suddenly to rise straight up on her beam's ends. Immense funnels of ocean water spurted hundreds of feet in the air all around her, and as the vessel settled down again, she seemed to snap in the middle and to disintegrate as if the bolts and bars from every clinch and support had been suddenly removed.
Her stern began slowly disappearing beneath the churning, white-crested waves. Fire broke out amidships, and dense volumes of black smoke half obscured the terrible disaster from the horrified boys' view. They saw the attempted launching of 2 long lifeboats. Both were swamped almost before they had been lowered into the water. The sea all around the doomed ship became dotted with human heads and floating pieces of wreckage. Then, all at once, a whirlpool seemed to form about the ship and to be dragging it resistlessly down into the icy depths. The water boiled over it, and nothing save a few scattered bits of driftwood remained to mark the spot. Alan shuddered and closed his eyes as he leaned against the flyer's taffrail. "Awful," he muttered huskily. "All of those poor souls, non-combatants at that, hurled into eternity without warning or provocation. Do you suppose that the vessel struck a submerged mine?" "Either that or it was torpedoed," answered Buck. "They say that the whole North Sea and English Channel swarms with German submarines for this sort of thing. But quick now, Alan, to work cutting us free of these dragging planes, or we ourselves will soon feel the water at our necks." It was hard work getting through those rivet supports of the huge planes. Bolts had to be cut away, steel cables to be sawed through, and seasoned wood supports hacked away. The boys' hands became sore and calloused, and their fingers stiffened. Despite the cold air sweeping past, their faces were damp with perspiration. The airship staggered in bewildering fashion, but the auxiliary engines kept it going at a speed that quickly put England beneath them. The young aeronauts had no leisure to study the effect of their appearance upon spectators below, however, for the airship was sagging more and more surely to one side. Fortunately, they passed over no large towns, and so were not fired on. "At last!" gasped Alan, as, with a final vicious blow, he chopped loose the final attachment of the great lateral planes on his side of the airship, and saw them plunge down into the sea. "Same here!" shouted Bob from the gangway on the other side. "I've just managed to cut us free over here." The beneficial effect of this lightening of the drag was at once apparent. The flyer righted itself and picked up a fair degree of speed. The elevation was increased to 2,000 feet, where propulsion was less modified by earthly wind currents. The little auxiliary propeller was performing its extra duties gallantly. It was now getting well along in the afternoon, and daylight was failing rapidly. Far ahead of them showed a thin rim of silver beyond the dark shadow of the land. "A river?" questioned Alan. "The Irish Sea," replied Ned shortly. "Where are we going to land?" asked Bob a bit anxiously. "It's not safe here. I had thought of crossing to the coast of Ireland and following along as far as our gas holds out, supplies running mighty low, in the hopes of getting as close to Queenstown as we dare. Then we'll drop in some deserted spot and arrange to ship the flyer back, while we get passage out of Queenstown for good old New York." "But we haven't the slightest idea where we are," objected Alan. "We'll know after we hit land again. We'll light long enough to get our bearings. Somebody go down below and relieve Buck. He must be about worn out." But Buck refused to leave the wrecked engine room, where, stripped to the waist in grease from head to foot, he still tinkered with the faulty acting machinery. In spite of his efforts, the speed gauge needle steadily shifted back. A bare 20 miles an hour was all it showed. Sunset flamed across the sky. Then gloaming came, and by the stars appeared one by one. Towards midnight there was a perceptible lessening of the ship's momentum, which no mechanical efforts of Alan in the pilot room could counteract. When the velocity had decreased to 10 miles per hour, he grew so alarmed that he was tempted to call Ned and Bob. "But no," said he, "they are worn out, poor fellows. As long as there's no land in sight, I'll let them sleep as long as I dare." It was about 5 in the morning when Buck's voice, coming up through the speaking tube, startled Alan out of the doze into which he had fallen as he sat there at the wheel. "What is it, Buck?" Alan asked anxiously. "Nothing new has developed, has there?" The voice at the other end of the tube was hoarse with desperation. "Wake up the other boys! Quick, Alan! This is the end. The sulfuric ether and gasoline won't mix properly in the engines any longer. 2 of the magnesium cylinders are damaged beyond all hopes of repair, and I can't get any concussion in the explosion chambers. The ammonia fans are gradually slowing down and the turbines are getting red hot. Within 10 minutes more, the engines will stop altogether and we will drop into the sea like so much lead. This is the last of the ocean flyer." End of chapter 30. Recording by Tom Hirsch.